Before we start the video, just a quick heads up. This is the third chapter in my series covering the Super Monkey Ball franchise. It's not required, but I recommend watching the previous videos for additional context. That being said, hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to Fallout, a Super Monkey Ball retrospective. As the Super Monkey Ball series began to grow in popularity, it was only natural that Sega would want to capitalize on the small wave they'd created. In fact, after the first game did so well, they decided to port it to the GameBoy Advance of all systems. But at the time, Amusement Vision was working on SMB2, so in the end, the game was co-developed by THQ and Realism, while AV simply supervised. Now, not much is known about Realism, but it seems that this was one of the only games they ever made. It's a shame too, considering the technical skill that probably would have been required to make this thing. Anyway, Monkey Ball Jr. released on the Game Boy Advance in late 2002. What a time to be a Monkey Ball fan! In just 2 years, fans had gone 3 entries. But the question is, how does this game hold up? One thing to remember off the bat is this largely borrows from SMB1. There's not nearly as many stages as the original, and a lot of the ones included were more so remade so that the GBA could run them. See, this game takes advantage of the system's 3D capabilities. Keep in mind these graphics were more so an illusion similar to the SNES, but there's no doubt that for a system primarily designed for 2D games, the fact that this game runs at all is a technical marvel. Mario Kart Super Circuit did the same thing, so if you've played that one, you'll know what it's like. That being said, you can tell they used up every bit of power and memory as they could on this thing. This game only has 74 stages compared to the original, which had over 100, and only a handful of them were completely new. But when they do throw one in, the design is on par with the originals. For example, Expert 24 is the word realism. And don't worry, they made sure to remake Expert 7, so there's no running. Now, before we get too far into the game itself, let's discuss the elephant in the room. Even if the 3D graphics were technically impressive, they're nowhere near that of the GameCube. I mean, they couldn't even make the stages curve. Instead, they usually resort to several turns of varying degrees. What's more, not only is the draw distance pretty low, but the whole thing runs at a pretty slow frame rate and likes to chug when you're going too fast or there's a lot of objects on the screen. Now, as bad as those drawbacks are, it is important to remember that this was running on a portable console in 2002. Yeah, these problems might be magnified when shown on a TV or smartphone, but back in the day, this was pretty acceptable. I mean, as far as an SMB1 port goes, this game did a pretty good job. The backgrounds, even if they are heavily pixelated, would still look pretty good on a GBA screen. The sound and music have been remixed to fit the sound card, and even the small touches like the multicolored ball or the way the sun causes lens flare is pretty awesome. But while we're talking about issues, let's talk about what's probably the worst one of all, the controls. As I mentioned previously, the original Monkey Ball game felt good because you had almost absolute control of every tilt of the stage. On the Game Boy though, they were forced to downgrade to this. Yup, a D-pad is your only method of control. Now, I'm sorry if this seems harsh, but locking a 3D game to 8 directions is just awful. Monkey Ball was not made for limited controls like this, and even though they work, they're more than enough to get on my nerves. This can really be felt when navigating thin platforms or making tight turns. Add slopes into the mix and your life gets even harder. Now, as a side note, I actually was able to use a control stick in this game thanks to the GameCube and the GBA player. This didn't really fix the issues though, since the game was still only programmed for 8-directional movement, so it only made the experience more physically comfortable. Anyway, the limited directions sound bad enough, but once you start playing, there's another roadblock you'll face. In this game, you only have 3 options which will determine how fast you roll: slow, normal, or fast. You can switch between these speeds whenever you want by pressing the face buttons, B to go slow, A to speed up. Just keep in mind that like with the first game, your momentum will still be applied, so don't expect B to act as a brake. Mastering this game feels like a completely different thing from its older siblings. For example, you'll need to speed up in certain situations, like when you're jumping off a ramp, but what precision you have is often lost. The slow speed, however, makes everything feel much safer and easier to control. But don't rely on this mechanic too much because the timer is still very much a thing, and it does not reward caution. I think the worst thing about all this is that the controls and physics engine discourage experimentation. What with the limited movement, the pretty poor depth perception, and the relatively low frame rate, not to mention the camera, which is often jankier than the original, taking risks in this game is almost never a welcoming idea. And remember, this is me playing on a TV. I can't imagine playing through this thing on a tiny screen, possibly without a backlight. Anyway, let's move on to the main mode of this remake. You still have the 3 base difficulties, but they're a bit different. Beginner still has 10 stages, but Advanced has 20 and Expert has 30. Additionally, each difficulty has 3 extra levels, and out of all the aspects changed, this one might be the best improvement. In the original, the extra stages were often repeated, or at the most, slightly tweaked. So if you completed Expert and went to the extra stages, a good handful of them would be old ones from Advanced and Beginner. This was a bit of a disappointment, even if you got some new stages thrown in as well. Here though, all 9 stages are their own challenges, leading to a much more refreshing experience. Additionally, they made it easier for beginner and advanced players this time around by making it so you just need to finish without using a continue and not needing a perfect game. Like I said, I was genuinely happy to see this change as it felt a lot more player friendly. Of course, the cynical side of me just assumes they knew how bad the controls were and threw the players a bone, but even if that's the case, it just makes the change all the more welcome. But don't worry, the requirement is still as strict as ever in Expert mode, and even if it's 20 levels shorter, I'd say it's even more difficult this time. No joke, using Infinite Continues my first run through took me over 3 hours warpless. But of course, merely completing the set isn't good enough. You need to do this within about 5 or 6 lives max. Oh, and like the first game, play points can only buy continues, not lives. And since the scoreboard takes your last score and not the highest of a session, they aren't really good for anything except casual practice. Don't get me wrong, they're still appreciated, but after Monkey Ball 2's unlockable lives, reverting back to the old system is a bit disappointing. Now, I do have to give the game praise here. Once you get to the extra levels, you don't have to worry anymore about doing it all in the same set of lives, because unlike the GameCube version, Master Mode is unlocked with play points. Yeah, it's pretty expensive, but grind to Expert Extra and you'll have enough to buy it 30 times over, so it's no biggie. Interestingly enough, there are only 5 levels here with no Master Extra to speak of. This has the ironic effect of making a Master run less stressful than Expert. But don't worry, this mode will still put your skills to the test, especially when it comes to doing everything within the time limit. In fact, that's an interesting pattern about this game's stage design. Although it's fair, the timers on these levels seem much more strict than the originals. Yeah, SMB1 did this too, but with Junior, the threat of timing out seems much more of a threat. Anyway, that's the main mode of the game, but don't forget this is a port of the GameCube version, meaning that 3 of the minigames have gotten new versions suited for portability. I think you know what time it is, so let's quickly go through my opinions on each. Monkey Fight. Since this is only a port of the first version, there isn't a sudden death mode, but this is still an awesome version. Actually, the fact that this is portable would have had my kid self hooked. There aren't really any compensations here, it's just pure zany fun. Monkey Bowling. As much as I dislike the 2 GameCube versions, I actually found myself liking this one a bit more. There's nothing much changed here, so I don't know why that's the case, but I suppose it's just because of the handheld pick up and play nature. Still nothing to drool over, but solid nonetheless. Monkey Golf. This version retains a lot of the GameCube holes, but some are slightly changed to fit the simpler geometry. I will say though that if I were to pick up this game, Golf wouldn't be my first choice. It's not that I don't enjoy it, but if I were to choose any of the other games to port over, I would have probably picked Monkey Target. But hey, at least you can unlock another set of courses with play points, so that's pretty cool. Now, the last mode to talk about would be multiplayer. If you and up to 3 other friends had GBAs and copies of SMB Junior, you could play the 3 minigames together, along with an exclusive mode, Monkey Duel. Don't let the name deceive you though, it's pretty much just competition mode from the GameCube version. Now, unfortunately, getting 3 friends together with all the required systems, games, and cables wasn't going to happen, so I couldn't really try the multiplayer mode. But really, if you had multiple copies of Junior but didn't have either of the console versions, you had a problem anyway, let's just be honest. Looking at this game as a whole, it's technically impressive, yet held back in several ways. In terms of being faithful to the original, it does a pretty acceptable job given the circumstances. Even the minigames are pretty great. In fact, in a way, they're probably more attractive than the main game. What's more, there are some things this game does better than the original, like the more lenient rules to play the extra stages and the expanded use of the playpoint system. And even if this game doesn't have the branded bananas, it still has its own Easter eggs, like the secret codes on the title screen, even if I was too stubborn to use the main one. And to be clear, this game is not how it is for lack of effort, but simply because it was pushed onto hardware that wasn't meant for this kind of game. But that's just it, the game is fun despite the hardware, which is not a very good situation to be in. I mean, the controls alone fill this game with an artificial difficulty, especially an expert, despite the new and recreated stages. If they want to make a portable Monkey Ball game, I'd suggest either waiting for better hardware or maybe making a 2D spin-off or something more well suited to the D-pad. I really hate to say it, but there is a point where a game is just too far ahead of its time to be enjoyable, and SMB Junior touches, if not crosses that line in my opinion. But still, it was never meant to be a mainline title, and people seem to forget about it as they anticipated the next game, which would surely be another exciting entry. After all, with Amusement Vision at the helm, what could go wrong? But until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.